Do you want me to introduce them? I don't know that we need much introduction, but welcome to David Gaspers and Sarah Showalter from CPD. Thank you so much for doing this. Many of us were involved in the Denverite process and the blueprint process, and put the yellow stickies up in the rooms and gave input. So now what we're going to hear about is the steps that CPD has already taken, is taking, and will take to implement Blueprint. So Sarah, we were just saying we hope to have plenty of time for questions, and David thought his part would be about 20 minutes. Does that sound good to you, Sarah?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm not planning on saying much, just going to do a quick intro, and then David will walk you through all the good stuff.
Great. Okay, so welcome everybody. We're going to start because we have a lot to talk about. So Sarah, you want to start with the introduction?
Sure.
Hold on 1 second, Christine.
Oh, yes.
I'm here trying to give David the rights to give his presentation, but
I can hit share screen and see what happens here.
Okay, see if you have the ability.
It does say a host disabled participant screen sharing. So yeah, you do need to do something on your end.
I'm gonna go back. You guys go ahead and talk. I'm gonna go into the back end here on Zoom.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so it's okay for me to go ahead while you're doing that? Okay. Great. Well, good morning. Thank you so much for having us. Remember coming to see you all when we were working on the comprehensive plan and Blueprint Denver. And it's exciting to be here to talk about how we're implementing them now.
Testing.
Okay, Adrian, we got you. Please mute yourself now.
So David's going to touch on the comprehensive plan as well, just because that's kind of our starting point. It's the grandmother of all of our plans, and Blueprint Denver is a supplement to the comprehensive plan. And as you all remember well, that was part of Denver Right, as we also updated our comprehensive plan, which was over 20 years old at that time. And so a lot of that plan, but also Blueprint Denver, is about not just what CPD is doing, but what our colleagues and other departments are doing as well, because we can't implement the vision in those plans without a lot of multidisciplinary work. And so Denver Right really set us up for that. We did a lot of great collaboration, for example, with Parks and Recreation and Department of Transportation and Infrastructure and the Health Department and the Housing Department, et cetera. And we're continuing to collaborate and work together on projects to bring these plans to fruition. They're 20-year visions, and so there's quite a bit that would have to happen to implement everything in them. But we're doing the best we can to take what is now becoming even more limited resources, thanks to the impacts of COVID, to really focus on how do we make sure that we're working together as a city to achieve the vision in these plans. So thank you for having us, and I'll turn it over to David. I'll be around to help answer any questions, but he's gonna do the presentation. So thanks.
David, you should have the ability to share now, at least on my end.
Still tells me host disabled participant screen sharing.
Could you go ahead and email it to me really quick if I give you my...
Oh, no, it's back. I've got it now. I think we've got it. Yep.
Awesome. I'm glad I got my tech end on the back end. I'd be a bad millennial if I didn't get this figured out.
Never. All right, so let's see. Can people see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. All right, so yeah, it would have been difficult to forward it to you. I have kind of a mix of some slides as well as some web-based visuals here. So thanks, Sarah, for the intro, and just to give everyone grounding on how we expect to use these annual reports. As we know, the plans were adopted in 2019, and both plans call for annual reporting on plan implementation and metrics tracking. So we anticipated this type of effort on an annual basis, and also have in those plans the idea that tracking progress or lack thereof may lead to a plan amendment in a shorter time frame, at least at the strategy level, right? Like our strategies, our programs and projects actually moving the needle with these visions. and how can we track that? So those are in the plans themselves. We anticipate going to City Council's LUDI subcommittee every March with this annual report for both comprehensive plan and Blueprint Denver. As Sarah mentioned, it very much a multi-department effort to implement these documents, and it's a multi-department effort to report back. Obviously led by CPD, but with the implementation matrices in particular, we have a lot of input from our city partners on what programs and projects are implementing the comprehensive plan and Blueprint Denver. And then we tried to move to something more like a web-based report. That way it serves as more of a portal for the plans themselves, easy to access, in a way we can have the interactive maps built right into some of these high-level summary and reports. And then, of course, even before we get to LUDI, we'd always be going to planning board with the same type of reporting every February or March each year. And so with that, let me see if I can handle my technology now, Ian. Get out of that and go into a few different web pages that are already open. All those links would take you to these, and these are obviously all on the CPT website. So we've used this thing called a story map to allow us to make our executive summaries web-based. We obviously have those as PDF documents you can download, but these web-based story maps kind of serve as a portal into the plan. So this is what a comprehensive plan 2040 looks like, and what we showed City Council back in March. They're heavily linked, and so they're easy to navigate and actually get into more information if you need it. You can go to each one of the different chapters on the top of this one, and as you start to scroll through, you can access all the different plans from Denver Right. Oh, I'm actually at the end. I'm sorry about that. Let me going backwards. There we go. That's better. That's the intro. All right. So the content here is from our executive summary. So I'm not going to read this to you or explain it to you. Just wanted to make sure that you understand the usability of these story maps, and that you can download the full plan or jump to any of the other Denver Right plans right from it. And it's using the 6 vision elements as the organizational structure of it, of course. And so the first vision element in Comprehensive Plan 2040 is equitable, affordable, and inclusive. So we do lay out what that means in the document, take advantage of a bit of an educational opportunity here to make sure we're understanding what equity means, opposed to equality, for example. Then we list the 9 different goals that we have for this vision element. And then if you wanted to take a deeper dive into the strategies, you can just go right down here and link to the comprehensive plan PDF itself, and you can read those strategies that we have in the document. And then to the point of the metrics idea, we have measuring our success for each one of these vision elements, right? 6 vision elements, 6 metrics tied to those. First one for equitable is using the Housing plus Transportation Index, a national index of identifying cost burden households. And so what we have new here compared to what was in the actual plan itself, this was the baseline year 2017 for this metric. We do have a new data point 2018, and then here's our target of 2040. We did actually move in the right direction here. I would preface, though, that we're not claiming success on any of these metrics yet. Many of the data points are actually from years preceding the adoption of the plan here. We did want to start to get out and do this on an annual basis, though. So we're starting to track and get those data points so we can see trend lines. So we also heard a lot from council when we presented on the need to have even greater depth of the data and the metrics on this particular vision element of equitable, inclusive, and affordable. And so we can show you that here in a little bit on what we've developed since we took this to council earlier this year. I'll try to go through these quickly because we have a lot of cover. Next one was the strong and authentic neighborhoods. Again, we have 9 different goals for those. And you can link to the strategies again if you want to take a deeper dive on that. The metric for the strong and authentic neighborhoods is looking at how are we becoming a more complete neighborhood. That's a term that we use in Blueprint Denver. And it's about access to quality transit, jobs, retail within walking and rolling distance. And again, the data is lagging here a little bit, but we did add 1 additional neighborhood to meet that that threshold of 50% of neighborhood residents since our baseline year. Next element is connected, safe, and accessible. And here we're looking at our high quality multimodal transportation options. There's 10 goals with this vision element. And again, you can get to those strategies. And the metric we're using here is the percentage of Denver commuters that drive to work alone. Target of 50%. Our baseline number was 70%. And we did have a slight improvement of 1% on that since that baseline year. So a long ways to go on that one, of course. Next one is economically vibrant and diverse. There's 10 goals for this one as well. And our measure of success is looking at how well we're doing in certain economic sectors, what our Department of DIDO, Economic Development, calls diverse, innovative, and growing economic sectors. And here we have a target of 60%, base year of a little over 51%, and we've seen a slight uptick on that. Here is another example where we had to update the base, first example where we had to update the base year a little bit because we had to be able to do this on an annual basis, tweak the data points a little bit. Next one is environmentally resilient as a vision element. We had 11 goals here with environmentally resilient, and we used the 80 by 50 climate action plans, greenhouse gas metric. So we're trying to reduce carbon emissions 80% below 2005 levels by 2050. This is another one that might change in the future as that seems to be evolving a little bit. And even now the metrics did evolve slightly with the data points here, but we did see a significant increase because of actually have changed the way international standards on how to measure carbon emissions. And so that is one of the reasons we saw a significant bump here from the base year. I don't know if we'll see that much of an improvement year over year going forward. That'd be hopeful. And then healthy and active Denver. Have 5 goals with this one. This is a metric where we actually took 4 of the most relevant DDPHE, Denver Public Health equity index metrics and used it as a measuring point. And in all 4 of these, there has been slight improvements. Again, not really claiming any success here yet because it's very early and really before we had adopted the plan. But you can kind of see how year over year those metrics will start to add up, and we'll be able to see if we're having a trend in the right direction over time as we continue to report back on the comprehensive plan. And then really quick before I go to Blueprint, I've been mentioning this implementation matrix, something that we really wanted to do for folks that really do like to take a deep dive and aren't wanting to stay at the high level is these matrices for both Blueprint and comprehensive plan. So we've taken here every single goal that we have in the comprehensive plan, organized it by vision element, listed the goal, each strategy that's within the plan. And then this is where we worked closely with all of our other city departments and even outside city partners to identify what projects or programs we're working on currently or in the near future to be implementing these strategies. And then a column on project status as well as project notes, where if there's an active website for the project or for plan or anything like that, you can actually click on and get more information very quickly. So it's probably not perfect from a usability standpoint, but it's I think we'll get better and better as we continue to use it.
Hey, David, before you jump on, could you drop the link in the chat to these documents so that people can just copy and paste now, play around later if they want to?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I can do that as soon as I'm done chatting here.
And do you mind if we take any questions now in regards to comp plan before we?
Yeah, that'd be fine. We could break with comp, and then I'll come back with blueprint. Yeah.
And could I ask that you keep the PowerPoint handy, because I already see some things I think maybe need to come back up?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll have all the, and yeah, I still have some slides on the PowerPoints. Also, in particular, I've highlighted some key implementation action items on slides, so that might answer some of your questions as well.
Well, what do you think, Christine? Do you want to go forward with the slides, or do you want to go to questions?
I think we should just let him finish the slides, and then you can do the questions.
Sure, that sounds good. Let me just go to blueprint. I won't go through the entire blueprint story map. Hopefully you'll have a chance to look at it. It's a lot more robust. It has all the interactive maps for the key equity concepts, future places map, future context, street types, the modal priorities. You can zoom in, get all the data from the equity concepts, for example, et cetera. So it's very interactive, but it would take a long time to walk through it. But since we're talking about implementation today, I wanted to focus on the real annual reporting element of it. So we have this is at the end of that story map, but this is a separate one that you can kind of help navigate to. If you want to go back to the executive summary, you can just click on this link. But the metrics of Blueprint Denver and how well we're doing with that so far. So we have 7 different metrics for Blueprint Denver. Very first one here is a jobs to households ratio. We want to keep a strong balance of jobs and households, so we're not leaning one way or the other. Our 2040 target of maintaining at least 1.8 jobs per household within Denver. And right now we're slightly above that, and we actually ticked up to 1.95 jobs per household in 2018. So that's a good sign that we're maintaining that good balance for our tax base. Another metric we have here is, and it might look familiar if you've seen presentations on how we tracked areas of change and area of stability. In the old Blueprint Denver is looking at private investment into our high growth areas. And so we historically, with the old Blueprint Denver, had a historical average of around 5 to 1. So that's essentially for every dollar spent in a low growth area, there's $5 of private investment spent in high growth areas like our centers, our corridors, high density residential in certain districts. And we've maintained that in 2019 with just above a 5 to 1 ratio again. So we're still maintaining that ratio. Another metric that might look familiar if you're familiar with the Blueprint diagnostic from the old Blueprint, where we look at how well we're directing housing to our growth areas. We have a goal here of having 80% of all new housing going to our high growth areas. Historically speaking, we achieved 67% in the old Blueprint Denver. In 2019, we hit 73%. Very similar metric here, but with jobs, where we're trying to direct jobs to our high growth areas. Again, very high target of 90%. Historically speaking, we only hit 64% in the old Blueprint Denver. And in 2019, only 51%. Again, this is very early and really before Blueprint was adopted. But I think what I've learned from this one is that jobs are a little harder to track just year by year. Over a period of time, they will probably normalize a little bit. So hopefully that 51% isn't something that we continue to see here. Then a couple of more design and landmark focused metrics. This one here is a metric that looks at the percentage of the city subject to additional design focused standards, something that we want to grow. Kind of tough to have an actual target on that, but you don't know what the actual right percentage is. So we don't actually have a target set, but we want to see this increase. And we did not see that yet in 2019. And then for landmark, we're we're measuring the percent of the city that has been surveyed by Discover Denver or similar surveys, and or has an established pattern book, which is something that we want to do with all of our NPI plans going forward. And so we want to have 100% target of this in 2040. We did see an increase between a base year from 2015 to 2019 of about 6%. And then finally, the last metric I believe I have is the Vision Zero metric that Dottie is tracking, and this is traffic-related deaths and injuries in Denver. And a base year number of 558 deaths or injuries, serious injuries in Denver, and saw that actually uptick, unfortunately, in 2019 to 602. So we have a lot of work to do on this, and it's going to take a lot of effort from everyone to hit that target of 0 in 2030. And so, let's see what I got here. Oh, sorry. A couple other things. Let me go to the PowerPoint first, and then I'll come back to this. So the key implementation action items that are hopefully are moving these metrics that I just discussed forward. First thing on the housing front, we're actively working on the affordable housing zoning incentive. Always Hope is leading this effort, and it's in phase 2, I believe. I believe Sarah could have a lot more details on this if you want to discuss it. Also on the housing front, something that we'll be launching in 2021 is the residential infill text amendment, where we're looking to improve access opportunity in all of our residential neighborhoods through more diverse housing choices, so we could achieve more naturally affordable housing in our neighborhoods. I think this one is important. Again, I don't have a lot of details on the effort, and Sarah could fill in on Abe Barge will be leading this. But, when we discussed this topic in Blueprint Denver, it was important, I think, that at the same time, other peer cities like Minneapolis was talking about eliminating single-family zoning. And we didn't hear that from our community at all during Blueprint Denver. That wasn't something that was desired. This is an effort to look at how we can gently broaden our options, but the idea of eliminating single-family zoning is not the intent of this at all, because that's not what we heard from our community, you guys, during Blueprint Denver. Design quality, residential infill does a lot here. This text amendment will also look at design quality in our neighborhoods and how we can address common concerns about how new infill, the design of that infill doesn't fit with the mass scale and form of older homes. And so that will also tackle that, which would be a really important step in the right direction. Mobility, Dottie is doing a lot of stuff right now. We have the complete street design guidelines in its final phases. This link right here actually would take you to the guidelines website. You can take a look at that, and that will lead us to updating street design standards in 2021 as they move forward. And of course, they are implementing over 125 miles of bike lanes here over the next few years. So they have a lot going on over there. And then with quality of life infrastructure, a couple ideas here that are obviously moving that forward. The large development review process is now in place and is helping us make sure that we get community benefits from big development projects that go through that process. And then DPR has their Parks Acquisition Fund, which is funded through Measure 2A. They have criteria already identified on how to choose parks, and they've done some small purchases, I believe, already. They are developing over the next, I think, 6 months, a strategic acquisition plan, I believe it's called, where they will actually have a more systematic approach to how they can be acquiring parkland and increasing park and open space within Denver. And then just to end this, let's see, again, we can navigate here. The additional resources here on the website. We have a couple of new tools here. One is these neighborhood dashboards that allow you to take a deep dive into the kind of data and statistics of each neighborhood. Christine, this is one of the things I shared with you earlier this week that you're asking for about kind of the demographics. And so you have citywide here, but you can also jump to your neighborhood or a neighborhood in question And then there's several different pages of data here that can help you see the makeup and of each neighborhood. And Christine, I just wanted to show this because I was looking at this after I sent this to you. I think it's page 4. It does have a breakout of our demographic makeup of our neighborhoods here. I believe is one of the things that you're asking for. So this could be an easy way to actually identify that by neighborhood if you want to do that without looking at that spreadsheet that I sent you. And then another thing that we have here is tracking vulnerability to displacement. So you can actually access this from a link within that neighborhood dashboard homepage. And this is a interactive map that you can click on and off all the different data. This is, and again, Sarah probably could give you more details, but was developed in response to council members' interest in having access to this data after our Ludi presentation, and in particular to the equity metric and how we could take a deeper dive in some of this information and start using it. So I think with that, I can open it up to questions.
That's great. And thank you for all these maps, David. They're very useful, especially since the data from Blueprint is 2013 to 16. It's kind of dated.
Yeah, we want to be able to update it whenever that we have better data. We want to start using it, right?
So, Ian, are you going to run the questions? I don't see any yet in the chat, but
I'd like to start by having him drop the links in before we forget to do that. So
yeah, sure. If you could, it'll take me a few seconds here. I'm not as good with Zoom probably, so give me a few seconds here.
Sarah, did you want to field the questions, or both of you? How do you want to do that?
Yeah, we'll just, depending on what the question is, David or I will answer.
Yep.
We'll both answer.
Okay. Let me see if I see any hands up. I don't see any hands.
It looks like, well, I haven't been following the chat, so that might have been more about the links, but it looks like there's some questions in the chat. Let's see.
Okay, let me look.
Christine, I have my hand up. It's Sherry.
Oh, well, go ahead, Sherry. I didn't see that.
Hi, Sherry. How you doing?
Hey, David. I'm well. Hey, this is actually a question for you. So good to see you. And hi, Sarah. Good to talk to you.
Hi. Yeah, nice to see you too.
So here's my question, and thank you for giving the information about residential infill. But David, and you know, you met quite a few times in the update to Blueprint Denver process with me and Charlotte Gertie and Sarah McCarthy. One thing I have a question about is ADUs, because, and I know the arguments about spot zoning, being a lawyer who does real estate and land use. So I understand why you don't think doing ADUs on a one-by-one basis is spot zoning. But I also want to point out that in the land use and built form recommendations for housing, there was criteria that said that standards should be adopted to be more context sensitive for things like height, mass, and setbacks. And also when I look at the criteria for the residential infill, I know that's part of what's being looked at in terms of context sensitivity. And so my question for you, we're getting requests, as I know other neighborhoods are, for kind of onesie, twosie rezonings for ADUs. And you already know in our neighborhood, part of our neighborhood, that's not a well-received message. But I kind of, and I think Gertie might be on as well, I'm kind of reflecting as we as neighborhoods get requests for these rezonings, and then our zoning committees have to contemplate it and fly our neighbors, etc. One thing that I think causes some of the most consternation about ADUs, at least in our neighborhood, and I suspect others, is that a lot of times they're, and we've seen two of them this way, the way they're designed, the windows take the privacy from the surrounding neighbors. Sometimes where the stairs are placed, if they're exterior, can take privacy away. And my question for you really is, seems like it would be better, instead of doing these individual zonings, if you don't want to call them spot zonings, for ADUs now, especially as they're part of the contemplated, what you call gentle density you're looking at. Could we wait to do these ADUs until you guys have developed some more criteria for them that could maybe make them a little more palatable for people?
Well, I think Sarah might actually be the
Yeah, I can
better
answer.
person to answer that.
Hey,
But
Sarah.
you're right, Dave. We do have I would say from a blueprint, we have policies in there about having those design thoughts, as well as a policy in there that until we have that more comprehensive solution to ADUs, that we will evaluate them on a case-by-case basis.
Because it sort of seems like we're putting the cart before the horse to us. And it's causing a lot of work for us as neighborhood associations. So sorry, Sarah.
Oh, no,
So-
no worries.
I'm also a member of the West Wash Park Neighborhood Association. This is Greg Holm. And a couple things I'd like to point out. One is that if you have a second story on your home, you have windows that look into your neighbor's yards. And that's not restricted. And
Yeah,
so
Greg, let's talk about, I don't want to take Sarah. Greg, can I have Sarah answer the question? And you and I'm happy to talk with you, but if you think about where the windows come, it's the rear setback that you're there. I realize that on the side. So we can let Sarah, I would love to talk to you about my thinking and what we're hearing, because we're hearing from neighbors is what I'm talking about.
Sure. I'm allowed to have my own opinion, uncensored or uncontrolled by you.
Of course.
To let Sarah answer the question.
Thank you.
All right, great, thanks. Well, I actually kind of am glad we had that exchange, because I think it's a great representation of the diversity of opinion in Denver about ADUs. And so I completely appreciate what you're saying about some of the concerns you have. And we all agree, including the people at the city, but even people who have been very supportive of ADUs and wanting them everywhere, and the outreach we've done, that there are some things we could change in the design standards, but I don't think there's agreement on exactly what should change. And again, your exchange was a great example of that. A lot of people think it'd be way too restrictive to not allow a second story. Some people think that would be a great idea. And so I think what we're trying to do is balance all that different input. And that's what the residential infill project is largely about. So apparently I don't know how to use the chat stream in Zoom, because I think I just responded to Ian instead of the whole group. But Greg, I saw you put in the chat stream about Portland's residential infill project, and we've been following that really closely and talked to their planners several times for lessons learned. They already allowed ADUs everywhere, so that was not part of their scope. But it is part of the scope of what we will do with our project, is talk about where should ADUs go in every neighborhood, but also very much address how they're designed. So that is coming, Sherry, for sure. I don't know that there's gonna be a lot of discussion around what the right solutions are. But in the meantime, to get directly to your point, there are people coming in requesting to rezone their properties, and we actually tried to make it very clear in Blueprint. We thought it was a good striking a balance between what we were hearing from the community. We had some people who really, really think that we need ADUs allowed on every lot across Denver immediately, even with the current design standards we have. And then we had all the way down to the spectrum of some people who don't want them, at least in their neighborhood, at all. And where Blueprint landed was saying we need more discussion around how do you design them the right way so that hopefully they can integrate into neighborhoods better, but they should go everywhere. It's not equitable to have some neighborhoods opt out, and it doesn't make sense to do large rezonings to enable them without having some better understanding of what the impacts might be, but that lot by lot, it is okay. And so Blueprint set that up. I understand that there's still concerns about how they might be designed and integrate into your neighborhood, but you probably know you're not alone. There are people across the city. I'd say it's one of the most frequent rezoning applications we get these days is for one individual homeowner to rezone to enable an ADU. And right now there is clear plan support for that because it provides a really great housing option. And there hasn't been policy direction to say, oh, if one homeowner wants to do that, we shouldn't allow them until we can do this bigger residential infill project where we change some of the design.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, Sarah. It is, and Greg, of course, you're entitled to your own opinion. I would never say otherwise. I'm just saying, as a neighborhood association, it's a lot of work when we flyer people, and we're constantly hearing,
Yeah.
I think that they might be, and I'm just thinking they might be, maybe if not embraced, at least accepted more by people who don't like them, if we could address some of those issues sooner rather than later. That's what I'm thinking.
No, that makes sense. Christine, do you want to, you put a question about how ADUs support housing options?
Well,
do you want
yeah.
Can I address that quickly?
Yeah, I put it in at the end. I know I'm not next in the queue, but I just know from Chaffee Park that the number one reason they want them is so they can have a guest house. I'm not sure that the goal of affordability for working class families is really clear in this policy.
Right.
That's
Well, I want to be
asking.
clear, that's not what our policy says either. And you'll note that I said it provides more housing options. I didn't say it provides a solution for working class families. I think we agree with you in a lot of neighborhoods. ADUs might not be serving some of our more moderate or lower income homeowners because of the cost that it, or renters, the cost that it takes to make one, and then what you might rent it out for may not be as affordable. But a couple of things I point out, one is that that's still a really valuable housing option to have in a neighborhood that so far only has a single unit home as the primary housing option, even if it's not going to be one of our most affordable housing options in the city. And it's more of a rental property that's at quote unquote market rate, it's still more affordable than renting out a whole home. More importantly, though, I think it's just that it provides options for people that might not want a single unit home or they want to age in place. I think that's the biggest one we heard, and why Blueprint Denver thought it was so important, because we have a lot of people who spent 30 or 40 years living in these great single family neighborhoods, and they want to stay, but they don't feel like they have options to stay there. Or another story we heard a lot is people have kids who graduated from college and might want to come back to the neighborhood, and there's nowhere for them to live. And so these do provide, it may not be it's certainly not going to be a robust tool for solving our lower income housing crisis, right? But it's still an overall tool that our partners and hosts, the housing department, feel is something that can really just expand all the options that are out there. And then the final thing I'd add is there is a model to make them work more for people, which is what hopefully folks are familiar with, what Renee Martinez Stone is doing in Southwest Denver. She has what's called the Single Family Plus program, and it is basically a way for existing homeowners that are in more moderately priced neighborhoods now that are experiencing a lot of gentrification in Southwest Denver to build wealth. And so the idea is a lot of them even already have zoning to enable ADUs. They didn't know that, or they're cost prohibitive because of how much they cost. So she's trying to solve it the whole spectrum, from the cost of building. She's worked with Habitat for Humanity and lenders to come up with special financial packages that make it a little more affordable for the homeowner. And also by working with Habitat and others, designing template ADUs so they're a lower cost to build. If you participate in the program, though, you have to agree to income restrict who you would rent out the unit to. So it's a way to build wealth for the moderate income homeowner, but you also in exchange get a more affordable ADU. So I do think there are models out there where you can actually say an ADU is going to help, whether it's the homeowner who built the ADU, and or the person that might rent that ADU, but that requires extra work, right? It's not just through zoning enabling it, it's also through having those programs in place. And I think our hope, and I know like in Chaffee Park, for example, Councilwoman Sandoval is sponsoring that rezoning, has talked with Renee about learning what's happening and how that program's working, so we could start figuring out what would it take to apply it in more parts of Denver.
Ian, can you?
Yes, I
detail?
see your message here.
Okay.
Christina, it's in the chat. Miles is actually next, and then Joe.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sarah and David, for coming here. I've got a question about Blueprint Denver and the genesis of it. I've been involved with the East Central Area Plan for the last 3 years on the steering committee. And I've also participated in the initial community meetings for Blueprint Denver. And during the Blueprint Denver meetings, it was playing games, looking at density. And what I found out with the ECAP was there were some large changes to zoning embedded within Blueprint Denver. So I'm kind of wondering, it seems during Blueprint Denver, they were talking about big picture, what would you like, and where would this happen? Kind of, it didn't really touch on the changes that it's recommending. And so basically, Blueprint Denver requires missing middle housing, which is putting multifamily housing in low density zoning, as well as requires the adoption of non-traditional housing types, and also allows CPD to evaluate and upgrade neighborhood places periodically. So if you lived in a neighborhood in CPD in a few years felt it should have higher density, they could then upzone it, recommendations for upzone. So can you talk about it? It seems like I see Blueprint Denver kind of hoodwinked everyone and now requires these things to be implemented, as it kind of fooled the whole city. You know, after attending those meetings, it really didn't talk about these required changes that would be implemented in every single one of these neighborhood plans. So I'm just trying to understand, where did you guys get this idea of Blueprint Denver, and what is it based on? And built into it are all these required changes to the zoning that the city knew nothing about. And now it's been implemented, and this is going to have repercussions for the future of the city. And for more density, this is what the city wanted. But I just don't think the residents knew what was in this plan.
So Miles, yeah, I can speak to the blueprint part a bit, and maybe Sarah can jump in here as well. You know, it is a vision document, a high-level citywide plan that has policy recommendations in it. So, I mean, I think your term of requiring things, I don't know exactly what you mean by that, I guess. But from a plan perspective, you know, we obviously had an existing Blueprint Denver from 2002, which was our land use and transportation plan from then, and we use that as the basis, right? So there was an update to that document, and it did evolve significantly, right? But I mean, like the idea of the future places map is grounded, you know, how we developed that map was grounded on a methodology of looking at what we had in the existing Blueprint Denver, in the adopted small area plans, what's on the ground, the existing zoning, et cetera. And so the intent was to let neighborhood plans actually refine that document. And so that's the hierarchy, right? There's a question in here about hierarchy, right? And the comprehensive plan, as Sarah mentions, the mother of all the citywide plans. Blueprint Denver refines this, the policies a little bit. And then the NPI plans and other small area plans should refine it further by geography. I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but there's policies in Blueprint that have us to explore a lot of these ideas that you mentioned. I think the word require is maybe an overstep.
Yeah, I can add on. I think maybe you're getting out a little bit, Miles, from knowing what's going on with your neighborhood plan, is there is a bit of attention on some of these big citywide policy goals. ADUs is one of them we just talked about, but so is the missing middle housing, which is also part of residential infill. Which we heard really loudly from the community. And I don't know, Ian, if you want to jump in a little bit too, just because, and I see Joel's on here as well. There might be others that I don't see the names of, but both of them are on the Blueprint Denver task force. And so they can speak personally, I think, to the variety of opinions we got during Blueprint Denver. And I'm not sure I would agree with your portrayal of what Blueprint Denver says, because it's actually very clearly says that there are certain things that need to be in every neighborhood to make that neighborhood complete and help us make sure that we're giving the opportunity for everyone in Denver to have access to our great neighborhoods. And I think Blueprint Denver is pretty clear. David's right. It doesn't it's just a policy document. It doesn't require anything, but it does set the expectation of what our vision is for the city and the policy that we want to follow when we do change the rules. And one of the things there was pretty strong consensus on from the community is that it's not equitable if certain neighborhoods can opt out of things that are helping us achieve our goals for more equity and being a complete city. And so that's playing out a little bit because there are still some neighbors who really don't want ADUs or don't want a duplex integrated here or there in their neighborhood. And now in the neighborhood plans, we're not able to say, oh, through this neighborhood, this neighborhood plan, we're going to say, no, thanks. We're good. We don't need those housing options here. That's not how a neighborhood plan works. And so that might be what feels like a requirement to you, is that it's not so much a requirement as it is that you're not consistent with our vision. Is that neighborhood plan would not be consistent with Blueprint Denver, which is a legal criterion for it to be adopted, to say it meets the vision that's in this broad community developed plan, that we actually did have very, very strong community input, that it was important to make sure, again, not that we eliminate single unit zoning and completely change what we cherish about the neighborhoods in Denver, but that we find ways to help them evolve and have more options.
And I might comment back. These comments are basically from my interacting with the ECAP, CPD representatives, and basically reading Blueprint, it does require that missing middle be integrated within all low density neighborhoods. And they used a lot of the wording to say, we cannot, this is just going to be in the plan. This is in your neighborhood plan because it is directed by Blueprint Denver. And you're correct, it is a policy, but they're using that as the basis to say all of this must be applied across all the neighborhoods. And missing middle is defined as duplex, triplex, and quadplex. So you're requiring these things to be put into single family resident areas or zoned areas. And I guess my point is, we haven't defined what that is, and this is being put into the neighborhood plans, but we don't know what it means. And
Right.
So I think that's more the issue here is, so what it's saying is potentially you could put a quadplex in a single family neighborhood. If Denver says all missing middle is a quadplex, oh, well, then throughout 70% of the city, you can build that anywhere. So it's just disturbing to me that there's a lot of details in here that are moving forward, are now going to be in these neighborhood plans, and we're not sure how they're going to be implemented. So that's why I was wondering, it's like these anchors were put in Blueprint Denver so they could then implement them later like we're seeing now. And I see huge ramifications of this, and the neighborhood plans cannot have any input on these because it is, we were told it's in Blueprint Denver, it has to be in your neighborhood plan. So we have no say as to what type of missing middle housing is put in the neighborhood or the context or anything related to that type of future city plan. So
Yeah, I mean, I'd characterize that a little differently. You are right. It's exactly what I just said. Your neighborhood plan, for it to get adopted by city council and approved by planning board, we need to show it's consistent with Blueprint Denver and the comp plan. And it wouldn't be consistent to say, we are never going to add anything beyond single unit as the only use in all the neighborhoods in this planning area. So that's why our planners are saying, no, we have to follow what Blueprint says. But you're just like Blueprint, the neighborhood plan doesn't actually change any rules. It's also a vision and a policy document. Residential infill, the project we've been talking about, that's what will change the rules. And that's a citywide process that we will have a variety of stakeholders and tons of city input throughout all of our communities on should fourplex be allowed? Should it just be twoplex? Does it depend on how big the lot size is? Does it depend on if you're close to transit? That's what that project's for. And I understand it feels frustrating when in the meantime you're trying to work on a neighborhood plan, you don't know exactly how it's going to play out. But that happens all the time with neighborhood plans because the devil's always in the details, and the neighborhood plans don't say this is exactly how it's going to get implemented. They set the vision. And in the meantime, it wouldn't be appropriate for somebody to apply to, Blueprint's very clear about that, to apply to just go rezone their one lot to allow 4 units in the middle of a single unit area. We say it needs to happen citywide through a text amendment. So we haven't opened the gates for your neighborhood, Congress Park, to all of a sudden have a bunch of 4plexes everywhere through Blueprint or your neighborhood plan. We have to do the work of residential infill first.
So I would just quickly comment back. So in implementing the Denver infill, how are you making sure all the neighborhoods have a voice in this? Because all the contexts are quite different. And even with ECAP, we have Denver zoning on one end all the way down to Congress Park, which they were calling the suburbs of the ECAP, which is true. And the contexts are so different, and the implications are so different. So how are you going to make sure, like, I think there was comments about group living, that it was just kind of all the supporting people for those programs were basically making decisions on those plans. So for this Denver infill, which will impact the whole city, how are the neighborhoods being involved and engaged so they feel they have input on what the outcome is? Because I would hate the city to spend the time and deal with 12 people who are talking for the whole city, because we have a large city and we have many different neighborhoods. So what is your plan for making sure that that's equitable, that the neighborhoods have some say in this?
Oh yeah, I mean, we completely agree. And getting the entire city engaged, and that's what we did for Blueprint Denver. And we want to use a lot of the same strategies there. So we have a very diverse stakeholder group that represents people in different, what you were describing is what we call neighborhood contexts. So somebody who lives in a suburban context, which is not Congress Park, but actually like the post World War II, more cul-de-sac, your garage faces the street kind of neighborhoods we have, and more of the outer ring of Denver, to urban edge, which is kind of in the middle, to urban, which is what Congress Park is, all the way to the downtown context. We have people who live in the downtown context. For residential infill, that's not really going to affect them. But all the neighborhoods that it will, we are working very closely with the council offices to make sure that we have good representation across different types of contexts, but also those contexts in different places, because it might be a little different flavor if you're in the suburban and far southwest Denver versus far northeast Denver. So we completely agree with you. And we're going to do a lot of the same strategies we did the Blueprint Denver as well, which is you have a diverse stakeholder group that follows very closely, and similar to what you've done for the East Area Plan or East Central Area Plan, where there's been a lot of meetings. And in this case, for when you're changing zoning citywide, it's even more intense. It usually lasts quite a long time, and there's lots and lots of meetings and lots of volunteer hours that go into it. But that's not our only model. We need to hear from lots of Denver residents through this. So we have community meetings, we do online surveys, we do focus groups in all different kinds of neighborhoods. So we completely agree with you that we need to have as much diversity as possible in who participates. And we are always looking for ideas of how to help connect and do better, especially for the voices we often don't hear from. So I think the biggest challenge we have on projects like this is people that often they're people of color, they're people of lower income that don't have the resources, aren't as likely to get engaged. So we hear you and we completely agree. And I'd say it's one of the things we're constantly working on in CPD every day. How do we do our outreach better? How do we get all the voices at the table?
This is Ian.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that. And just a quick follow-up. Can you commit to meeting with the neighborhoods, that you will meet with the neighborhood groups for this Denver infill?
I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, we meet with neighborhood groups all the time. Like group living, we've met with every RNO that asked. So, I mean, I think that's what we always do. We meet with neighborhoods.
I just want to make sure that Joe gets their turn.
Thank you, Joe Untitled, City Park West. I've got just a couple of quick questions. First, a couple of statements. we met with a group of nonprofit housing providers, developers that have been in the area for years, Denver Housing Authority, Brothers, Del Norte. They request the city be more proactive of letting them know about infill land so that they can develop affordable housing versus incentives for private developers. And we echo that because we feel like they're more in it for the long haul. And we are requesting that the city come up and work with all the RNOs for a written policy for outreach to communities. So it's not hit and miss, and it's not, well, we welcome all comments. We want a written policy for how the city will provide outreach across the city and how people can be engaged. Because right now we do this and we express our concerns, but the task force in that are appointed places, and it doesn't seem like it is very open across our neighborhood. It's not open to people who want to be involved, and they go and they're intimidated there. So we really need to come up with a written policy for everything the city does that is that affects the city on a large scale, like ADUs and group living and blueprint and the comprehensive plan. So that's my comment. Thank you, and thanks for your time this morning.
I see we might have time for maybe one or two more questions. I just want to take an opportunity to speak to some of what I'm seeing in the chat. I see some questions here about what can we do to educate people who don't know anything about zoning or they're new to zoning. INC actually recorded a lot of videos, and our videos recorded from the Planning Academy, and so we can direct people to those. As we brought on new zoning chairs from different RNOs, we kind of have a document like that. I can be glad to share it with all of you, to share back to your neighborhoods, that says, start with these readings and start with some of these videos. And then Christine and I have made ourselves open to having one-on-one conversations with people about this. Now I want to come back to this conversation about translation and participation. We held up Blueprint Denver. I was a part of that because of the really poor engagement of people of color, and something that I take very personally. Again, we see it as a problem with group living. And when I asked Robin Kanich about it, she says, oh, well, we're not really tracking them that well. I'm like, well, if we're not tracking it, how do we know where we can improve it and how we can get better? And so I guess it's really frustrating, I think, to see community planning and development continue to not get that right because community is in their name. And I know that are often using consultants. So how do we come to a better process where we're pouring lots and lots of money into consultants who seem to be making the same mistakes? And I do want to know, and I've said this here before, this is a problem that's coming up about community engagement at all levels of government. At the state level, we're having huge conversations with the community, the public health department, working on that department and those issues, that even across different agencies in the same department, they do community engagement differently. And I think there is this conversation about how do we move the ball forward. I hear you, Joe, when you're saying there has to be some level of translation, top two languages. I think DPS is having this conversation. I remain committed as part of INC and in leadership to having this conversation with Sarah, but it does become old, I think, as a Latino, to continue to say you're trying and then the metrics come back and it's not the case.
Ian, I know we need to get to Courtland Hyser, but there is a question that to David specifically. I don't know if we have time for this. Speaking to the hierarchy of plans related to city level versus neighborhood level versus station area plans, conflicting information and goals. When will the utilitarian goals of Blueprint Denver become a higher priority than small groups that don't want to see change near these same sites? David, can you answer really quickly so we can get to Courtland?
Yeah, and Courtland actually can add to this. Sorry, I've got a 2-year-old behind me crying. But Blueprint does actually, the other small area plans, I should say the comprehensive plan needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So, I mean, there is a hierarchy there where the citywide plan should be influencing the small area plans. And those small area plans are refining, but they can't be in conflict with. And so that's a big distinction there. And I think
Hi,
Courtland
David.
actually has a few slides on that.
Hi, this is Anthony Gingara with Metro Denver Local Development. We're a nonprofit group. We're with the Broadway Partnership, and we work heavily in Baker, Santa Fe's Art District, and Washington Park. I was the one that asked this question, and the reason I'm really asking this question is because there is conflicts with high transition areas such as future places that show residential low medium community corridors, and then areas in TOD. Station area plans call for a very specific higher density, so to push the multimodal transit. And then we have neighborhood plans that are almost a decade old. And then we have Blueprint Denver that has these progressive thoughts and is trying to take all of these different vision elements and make them a reality. So when does anything take traction? Because specifically I'm working on one site right now where we're trying to rejuvenate and look for the highest utility out of that site. And the city tells us, well, Blueprint Denver, these are our larger goals, but you have to look at the Baker Neighborhood Plan and Alameda Station Plan first, which are both from 2003 and 2009. So I guess, can you talk a little bit to when someone puts their foot down? When do we start saying, we need to move forward? We're already in a housing crisis. It's just going to get worse. The goal is to have affordable housing. The goal is to increase the design elements in this neighborhood. But we're just running up against issues because, you can't pencil out a Main Street 3 and get a micro development going. So where do we find ourselves?
Just really quick there, and again, Courtland can actually add to this because I mean he supervises all of our neighborhood planning, and that can help refine and update those older plans. But in construction of Blueprint Denver and the future places map, in the context in particular, we looked at those adopted plans. So like the Alameda plan, we would have looked at that, and we weren't trying to change that unless there was specific community input through the blueprint process to say, hey, we didn't get this right in 2009 or whatever. So we just used those small area plans and translated that to the new places map. That was our intent. If we got something wrong there, we'd have to look at that. It's not, we're humans, it's possible. But we spent multiple iterations of that map trying to solve all those issues, and Christine and others on this call helped us, right? I would just say that hopefully Blueprint and the stationary plan isn't in conflict from that map perspective.
Through a pre-application process, we found it was.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we can talk off that online and look at that. And
sounds good.
But
Hey, David, I have one last question for you because I haven't had a chance to go through this broken down Excel website spreadsheet. When a blueprint was moving through, INC requested a list of what was coming. Is that where I need to go to see what your priorities are for the next budget cycle or 2 budget cycles from now, even kind of a vision of where you're going? Because there just are so many recommendations. We really wanted to see where we're going. Where we are now is also important.
Just to clarify, Ian, so you were looking at what projects or programs were prioritizing from an implementation standpoint?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, you can see that at the end of the either in the comprehensive plan by each vision element, where we say the next big thing for 2020, or in Blueprint Denver at the end, we measure our success. We talk about how we're implementing it. We list out 6 or 7 different projects. A few of them I've highlighted here, but there's other ones. So that's where I would initially look at.
Can we work together to maybe lift that out and put it into a one-pager that's easy for me to to the RNOs?
It's on a spreadsheet, I think, Ian, that David identified.
Yeah, the spreadsheet is where you would see what's in the future too. Like you're asking 2 budget cycles from now, or whatever, right? You see the priorities, like these are the things that are 0 to, I don't remember the categories, 0 to 3 or whatever. That's
the deeper dive where you can look at that and you can see what's already moving forward.
I understand
what we still need to figure out.
I understand there's like a complex matrix. I guess maybe Christine and I can take a look and try to simplify this, because a complex matrix, I'm not going to get the average person to even.
Sure. The simplest one, and I could bring it up if you want, is at the end of the Blueprint Denver story map. We list just like, it's like 6 or 7, and they're just hyper.
It's one page.
That's what you want to look at. It's one
Right.
page. Just click on those.
Very
That's
straightforward.
the priorities for
Is
2020.
that web-based? Do you have like a PDF or anything like that? Maybe I'll make my own PDF just to make it easy to share.
You could do a screenshot of it, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it lives on a web page, but yeah, you could just quickly convert it into.
And are we seeing your goals reflected in the budget? That's my last question, because I know budget hearings are right now.
I'll leave that to Sarah.
Yeah. Yes, definitely reflect in our budget. Unfortunately, as I think you know, all of our budgets, the conversation was around where we're going to cut. So it makes it challenging, because there's things that, there are goals we have in these plans, and like when you look at that implementation matrix in particular, there's a lot of work that needs to get done, and we're going to have fewer people and fewer dollars, but that doesn't mean our goals have changed. They're still reflected in the budget. So we've thought a lot about how do we make sure that we're, like, for example, there's been some great points made about engagement. And so we had to pick positions that are vacant and needed to freeze them or abolish them, so that we don't lay off the people we have. Well, one position that we fought really hard in CPD to make sure we didn't, that's not filled, but that we're still planning to hire next year. The budget hasn't been approved yet, so. But in our proposal, and what's gone from the mayor to city council, is we would hire community engagement specialists for CPD to help us with all the challenges that came up today, right? And despite the fact that we've done a lot to outreach to a lot of communities that we often don't hear from as much, like you said, we actually do have a lot of data that we've been tracking that shows us it gets better, but we're still not at our goal, which is it should reflect the city's demographics. And so it's just an example of how we had to make a lot of hard decisions, but try to take the goals that are in these plans, which are very much about equity and inclusivity, and prioritize as best we can within the cuts we have to make, which is obviously really challenging, but to try to keep these goals forefront in the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ian, I think we should probably move on to Courtland.
I agree.
Because the questions are kind of overlapping. Good morning, Courtland.
All right, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, do you have a PowerPoint, or can you just chat? How do you want to do this?
I do have a PowerPoint. I think it'll be about 15, 20 minutes to get through the slides. And there is, you know, a good chunk of what we've been talking about are themes that are hit and addressed in the PowerPoint as well. So I think it'd be helpful to do that, and then maybe we could continue some of these conversations, you know, from the neighborhood planning perspective.
Okay. I hear that we probably will have a lot of questions. I mean, some of the neighborhood planning questions were already asked, but I guess we should let you do your 15 minutes. So see if you can share the screen. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll just have to ask, is it working? Are you seeing the slide? Okay.
Yes. Great.
All right. So my name's Courtland Hyser. I work on the neighborhood planning initiative at the program level. So, you know, the full suite of plans that we have going on at any one time, which plans are coming up next, that level. So sort of the high level of NPI. So there's 4 things I wanted to cover today in this presentation. The first is small area plans. I recognize this is a savvy group. You don't probably need me to tell you what a small area plan is, but it would be useful to talk about how it fits into the hierarchy, and you know why we do them when we have citywide plans and those types of things. Then I'll cover the neighborhood planning initiative program and the current status of it, where we're at now and what's coming up next. Some slides on public engagement and our approach to that, and then finish with some adjustments for refinements that we're thinking about for the future. What we've some lessons learned from what we've worked on so far. Okay, so at the very base level, the reason why we create plans is to create a shared vision that addresses the diverse needs and concerns of a community. And so the planning process at its heart is a process where we engage people talking about the future, define a vision for the future, identify strategies for achieving that vision, and then once it's adopted, use it as a decision-making tool for public investments and private investments. The two levels, as you're aware, that we have are citywide planning and small area planning. And for citywide planning, it sets the broad policies and recommendations that apply everywhere in the city, right? And there are a lot of citywide plans. We tend to focus, in the planning department on the two that we work with most directly all the time, which is comp plan and blueprint. But there are a lot of citywide plans, and these are put out by different city departments. Most of them address a single topic at the citywide scale. So the game plan addresses parks and rec facilities citywide. Denver moves peds and trails, transit, different plans by different transportation modes. Where we get a lot of value from doing neighborhood or small area plans is that you can take those individual topics, address system-wide by various citywide plans, and show how they interrelate within a specific area. So you get, which can give you a different perspective, right? Focusing on a smaller geography, seeing how the Parks and Rec system interfaces with the transportation system, which interfaces with land use in the area. That is one of the core values that you get from doing a small area plan, not looking at just the individual systems, but how they interrelate with each other. And you can get detailed, right, for the specific area. These plans are adopted as supplements and therefore must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And they update Blueprint Denver. And in a few more slides, I have some examples of specifically how they update Blueprint. But as we've already mentioned this morning, small area plans can't contradict citywide goals, but they can identify customized strategies for achieving those goals specific to each area. This is where we get our more detailed guidance for rezonings and other policy decisions. If you come in to rezone land and the parcel's located within an area that has a small area plan, it's the go-to document for getting guidance on that decision. Neighborhood and small area plans recommend capital projects and facilities, which not all of your citywide plans do that. So if there's new infrastructure that's needed, those types of things are often identified in these plans and eventually can become, bond projects or get implemented down the road after adoption. So this map in the various shades of pink shows the situation back before we started the Neighborhood Planning Initiative in 2016. We looked at, what plans do we already have in place? And in the hottest shade of pink here, 19.2% of the city had a plan that was relatively recent from within the past 15 years. Another 38%, close to 39% of the city had a plan that was older than that, so from the 80s or 90s, most typically. And 42% of the city didn't have any sort of neighborhood or small area plan at all. And so the guidance for decision-making in those areas really comes from the citywide plans because there isn't anything that's taking that closer, more detailed look. And it was the inequity of this that really led us to thinking about how we could change our planning model and ended up creating the Neighborhood Planning Initiative. Because in the next 15-year period, we want to look back and see that we had covered the entire city with small area plans instead of just 19% of the city. So the basics of the NPI approach is to get more plans done sooner. Like I said, the main goal is to cover 100% of the city with small area plans within about a 15-year time period. And so it accomplishes this by grouping neighborhoods together into 19 larger areas. There are as many as 6 neighborhoods within each of those areas. So instead of having to do 78 neighborhood plans, which is a really heavy lift, you can do a more manageable 19 NPI area plans. We have multiple plans in process at the same time. We always have 3 going at once. The NPI strategic plan, which we completed in 2016 before we launched the program, standardizes the plan content, which was an issue in a lot of older neighborhood plans or station area plans. They weren't always consistent in the topics that they addressed. And so those are spelled out here so that we have a consistent basis of things that always go into a plan. And then the process is ongoing and rolls, right? So we put ourselves in a position to be able to kick off new plans shortly after we complete a plan. This map shows how the areas were grouped together into those 19 areas, and this becomes the geography for NPI area planning. And then this shows how we made the decision within the NPI strategic plan as to which areas should be prioritized for the earlier rounds. There's 15 data points that fall into 5 different categories. And basically within each data point, a score is assigned to whether a neighborhood is performing higher or lower relative to all other Denver neighborhoods. And then higher scores get aggregated, well, all the scores get aggregated into an index, and the higher the score, the higher the planning need. And that is a data-driven approach to trying to have a rational basis for which areas are going to get planned sooner versus later. Try to go to the higher need areas sooner. And the results from that analysis, and this is decisions that were made, several years ago now when we did the NPI strategic plan, was it prioritized and identified the first 2 phases of NPI using that data analysis. So in the first round, we had far northeast, east central, and east areas. And thus far, we've completed one of the plans in the first round of NPI, and that was for far northeast. That was adopted last summer. And because of our rolling process, after the far northeast plan was adopted, we kicked off the west area plan. So the first plan in round 2 of NPI. I kicked off about a year ago, last October. East and East Central have had a much longer planning process and are still ongoing. We're at over 3 years now of planning process for both of those. But once we finish them, we'll move on to kicking off the other 2 phase 2 NPI plans, and that's for near Northwest and near Southeast. So I mentioned earlier that NPI area plans update Blueprint Denver. They're adopted as a supplement to the comp plan, and there's a process for, as we do the deeper dive within each planning area through an NPI area plan, we might learn things that would lead us to want to make changes and updates to Blueprint Denver, and the system's set up to allow for that. And so what we do in the NPI area plans is look at things using the same set of tools that Blueprint Denver does. So the neighborhood context, future places, the growth strategy, all of these things are addressed not only in Blueprint Denver, but also in NPI, using the same categories and everything for the mapping. And if there is a change that's needed as a result of the small area plan, then as part of the Blueprint annual update, for any plans that were adopted within the prior year, it can then be updated in Blueprint Denver. And so in that way, NPI ends up being one of the primary ways that we keep Blueprint up to date and fresh and relevant, is that as NPI plans are completed, Blueprint is updated consistent with any recommendations from the NPI planning process that may have affected these maps. Right. Moving on to community engagement, and I know a lot of this actually was covered in some of the discussion previously, but just to summarize, we try to provide many ways to engage in the planning process. And as already stated previously, our goal is to try to reach a wide range of voices and to try to achieve representative participation in our planning process to match the demographics of the community. We have a steering committee in addition to public outreach in general that engages in plan development at a detailed level. Steering committee members also typically are representatives of other organizations, oftentimes registered neighborhood organizations or business associations, nonprofit groups. And so they can help to expand outreach by being a conduit for the other groups that they may be members of, to relay material back and forth between the steering committee and the more detailed deliberations that are happening there, and RNOs or other groups that they represent. Partnerships are really critical to successful engagement. Some of the most important ones being the RNOs, community organizations that are active in the area, the council offices, which can help connect to stakeholders and other groups, as well as media. And we try to design the process to incorporate feedback loops so that people can see how the ideas are changing and that their input is shaping the plan. So we don't just put a draft out there for people to respond to. There's a process before that where we'll put out draft ideas, what we've heard so far, draft recommendations, then a draft plan, then a second draft of the plan, and draw attention to how the document or the ideas have been changing over time so that people can see how their input is affecting where the planning process stands at the moment. Consistent with this, we try to engage people in a lot of different ways. Online works for many people, not everyone. So we also do traditional community workshops, do targeted engagement by piggybacking on existing meetings, attending festivals with our street team, doing surveys on iPads and things like that, like Taste of Colorado, those types of events, having field tours and other events, focus groups, as well as the steering committee meetings. We try to get at engagement from a diversity of techniques and perspectives. All right, I'm going to wrap up here with highlighting some adjustments for future rounds of neighborhood planning initiative, starting with COVID-19, and has really been an accelerator for us in adopting more technology and doing more online outreach and engagement. And some of those are things that we've been doing increasingly since the pandemic started are highlighted here on this slide. So virtual public meetings, we had one just last week for the East Area Plan. Virtual open houses, which is different from the public meeting in the sense instead of being a live event that you attend, it's a self-directed engagement opportunity. We did this earlier this summer for the West Area Plan. Our internal terminology for this was, it was a module approach. So we put together draft ideas by topic, so mobility, land use and development, parks and recreation topics, et cetera. People could review the information and then complete a survey after reviewing it to give their feedback on the draft content and engage in this at their own speed. Could do one of them a day, one a week, do them all at once. It was up to you as a participant. Virtual steering committee meetings really function the same way as the meeting that we're having here this morning, held via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Virtual office hours. Traditional office hours would be that we would just say, we're gonna be at the rec center on this afternoon, and show up if you wanna talk to a planner. Well, with the online format, we've moved to a system where you can reserve a time slot to talk to a planner and then do that on phone or on Zoom or Teams. And that works especially well for people to have an appointment and not just have to show up and wait in line to talk to someone, but to know that they're going to get to talk to someone, say at 3:30 for a 20-minute time slot. And the last one I'll highlight is draft plan review, which is where the East and East Central plans have been recently. We have the Conveyo tool, which allows people to enter comments directly into the PDF and see what other people are saying as well. So community engagement enhancements being one of the second refinement I'd like to highlight is all those technology adaptations that I just mentioned. They're not just for the pandemic. We think that they're here to stay, and they're in the toolbox now that we will continue to use even after we don't have to have social distancing to allow for more ways to engage. And so I think that accelerator of adopting technology is something that we'll benefit from in the future with planning processes, even when we're not in a situation that forces us to do it. Another enhancement is to increase the use of targeted engagement to try to achieve representative participation, to try to match the demographics of the community. This is something that we did do in our current round of NPI. So we have been much more disciplined about collecting demographic data at public meetings when people take online surveys and try to compare that then to the demographics of the community and conduct additional engagement to underrepresented populations. That isn't to say that we succeed in matching the demographics of the community, but it's one of the main ways that we're doing to try to do a better job in that regard. And it's something that we'll continue to try to do a better job on. And one of the things that we think that will really help is, and this is a new idea, we haven't done this for a planning process yet, or for an NPI planning process, which is to work with community navigators in upcoming processes to better connect with the community. So a navigator being an individual who has some strong connection to the planning area and can help connect us to community members as we go through our planning process, and in ways that aren't having to show up to a meeting, right? So to say, I know about this individual or this group, you really should talk to them, facilitate or set up a meeting, and connect folks to the planning process who otherwise aren't connected to it. Some process refinements for the planning process itself. The big one is to rethink how we use our 18 to 24 months. That's the standard timeline that's identified in the strategic plan for how long an NPI area plan should take, about 1.5 to 2 years. And the main idea is to try to move faster on the front end of the planning process so that we can spend more time once there are draft options and alternatives that have been identified. And really the idea is to draft the content sooner so that we can spend more time on the back end reviewing it with the community and refining it, having multiple rounds of review, and just to bake that into the planning process. That's something that has happened kind of organically with our current planning processes, is recognizing that we might need a second or a third draft of a plan. That's probably just the way that things are and need to be, that we should just plan on having these multiple rounds of review. So if we're still going to be able to get plans done within about a 2-year time frame, it means having that material ready earlier so that it allows more time on the back end to do that. And then the fourth one is to revisit those indicators of planning need, the 15 data points that I mentioned a few minutes ago. That worked well at the time, but it predated Blueprint Denver. It predates the vulnerability to displacement mapping that David highlighted at the beginning of his presentation. We should take a look at Blueprint Denver's equity concepts and the indicators of planning need and revisit it to see if that decision-making model doesn't need to change, because we think it probably does. I can't tell you exactly how so, because we have yet to figure that out, but we need to revisit the equity concepts in particular and bake that into the decision-making process on where to plan next. So this is my final slide. I'll just wanted to highlight where each of our projects is currently. So East Central has its City Council public hearing scheduled for just a couple weeks out on October 5th. The East planning process is right behind it. It's going to Planning Board on October 7th and should be at City Council in November. For West, that plan's about mid-process right now. The next event is a virtual panel that's on the topic of understanding displacement. It'll be held on the evening of October 7th. And then there will be a planning board info item, which is a status update on progress on the plan. That's scheduled for the 21st of October. And once we finish East and East Central, we'll be kicking off the other two NPI Round 2 plans, near Southeast and near Northwest. And we would anticipate doing that in the first quarter of 2021.
Great, thank you, Courtland. I put in the chat there for everyone. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, please use your raise the hand chat function. Can I start with a few questions myself that I have written down here? Can you talk to us about what kind of responsibility and or training for outreach that stakeholders have? This is a comment I've given feedback to many council members, that you sit on a stakeholders group, there's really a lot of the impetus is put on you by the government, that like, oh, well, of course you're going to go do outreach to your group, but do you have some sort of metrics like, we want you to contact 100 people and we want you to document it? I feel like there needs to be some sort of responsibility and shared training that happens between the city and stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. We have done some of that, but more informally. So I think you're talking more about having like a formal expectation, right, that's set with the steering committee members, maybe as a condition of their participation on the steering committee. Like, I agree, to do these types of things.
Yeah.
We haven't taken it that far. I think that's a good suggestion for a way that we could improve, the steering committee process. Well, things that we have done would be to say, okay, our public meeting's coming up next month. We want each of you to bring, at least 10 people. That was something that we did in the Far Northeast planning process, as I recall, and had really good turnout at a lot of our public meetings. I don't think just as a result of that, but the idea that there's an expectation to meet.
Well, and training, not just an expectation one way. I mean, some people may be really in the weeds and they're good at that part, and the outreach isn't their strength, but we can help them grow. And I think it is about keeping track of whom you're doing outreach to, because continually when I'm approached with the Latino Forum, for example, halfway through a process, I'm like, well, who have you contacted so far? And they expect me to write a list from 0 to 100. And I would much rather look at a list and say, oh, look, I see some holes here. Let's grow and get better at this. Okay, next question. I have a couple, and I'm just going to go through them really quick. Executive privilege here. Can you talk about, do you have a partnership with Denver Public Library or DPS, considering the lack of internet access and seeing how these other agencies are working to get internet access to consumers and to residents?
Yeah, we do, but we've approached it more at the project level. I think there'd be an opportunity to do it at the program level to provide more consistency across different MPI plans. But yeah, we did, again, using Far Northeast as an example, we partnered with the library where they gave us steering committee meeting space in both Montbello and Green Valley Ranch. And because that's a really huge planning area, we alternated the steering committee meetings between the two different library branches. And we work with them to make materials available, and also they have their own engagement that they do for the library. I forget the name of the model that they use for it, but it's tackles a lot of topics that are very similar to what's addressed in a neighborhood plan in terms of like the community's priorities. And so we have coordinated with them on that as well in terms of like what they've identified. They center it around the communities around their library branches, but come away with a lot of the same stuff that we hear as part of the planning process about housing affordability and human connections within communities and those types of topics. Same thing with DPS, where we do work with them on meeting space, in particular hosting meetings and helping us with youth engagement as well. The West planning process, if you go to the website right now, you can see a new youth engagement effort as part of trying to connect to representative outreach for the community. That's largely going to be focused around high schools. And so those are some examples of these partnerships.
Great. I have two really quick ones here. This is one that I want to say thank you for seeing. I'm seeing more public comment just across CPD processes for people at the end to be able to jump in and speak, even in stakeholder groups. I think that's great. But one feedback that I've gotten from several members of INC is when you attend a public forum or it's in a webinar base and you can't see who else is participating, it doesn't feel like a public forum. If you don't know who else is in the room with you and who else is part of the conversation, it makes it harder for us to engage offline about who is there and who is on. And can you tell me, did I miss it, or did you talk about translation? In particular, West Denver, I ran District 3 race there for Veronica Bell. I mean, Vietnamese and Spanish so crucial. Is that an inherent component to this work, or is this something that has to be requested? I know that some RNOs on the East Central Plan had to purchase translation themselves. Can you talk through that?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of it depends on the demographics of the community and the people who are there, right? And so we have been customizing our approach for each planning process based on the community that we're working in. And so in far Northeast, very large Latino population, we had native Spanish speakers on the steering committee. For that process, we had all of our materials in English and Spanish, public meetings and steering committee meetings. And in not all areas of the city are like that, right? So we try to meet the needs of the community with the resources that we have in a targeted way to try to be effective within each area. Where it gets especially challenging is when you have multiple languages that are present within a community, like in the East Planning area, where we've had meetings in, I think, 5 different languages. So it's a lot more complex than just English, Spanish. It's more in those types of situations that it ends up being let us know in advance if you're coming to the meeting so that we can provide these interpretive services there. Because we did in earlier in those processes just make them available and then would waste a lot of money if they weren't used. And so we have moved more to a model of let us know in advance, which is the same thing that the city does for people who are hard of hearing and need American Sign Language.
Courtland,
but I think that if I could just say, one of the things that was mentioned earlier that I agree with is that it would be very helpful to have like a language access plan, which is something that a lot of cities have, but Denver does not have one. And if we had that, I think that it would go a long way in instead of doing a targeted approach, instead having a standardized approach that we could use as a baseline.
Can I just add a couple of points to that? Because I think to build on what Courtland just said, language access is a huge issue for the whole city right now, right? Not just community planning and development. I completely agree. We were talking about it a bit on the earlier agenda topic, but completely agree with a lot of what Ian and others have said. And I do just want to make clear, like, we spent over $20,000 this year on providing translation and interpretation services for a variety of projects, including MPI plans, and out of CPD dollars. And one of the conversations we're having at the city is how do we better prioritize and have, ideally, personally, I think we should have a citywide pot of dollars that is all about how we do translation and interpretation. One great step we're taking towards that is the Office of Human Rights and Community Partnerships, HRCP. They do a lot around how we engage immigrant communities, BIPOC, all the groups that are often challenging for us to reach, and they are hiring a position right now to coordinate language access for the city. So all of our departments, CPD obviously, but really pretty much everybody, and some of the big ones are DDPHE, environmental health, and DOTI and parks. We're all out in the community trying to get input from people, whether it's about what your new rec center is going to be, or a neighborhood plan, or a zoning code amendment. And we're all facing a lot of the same challenges that came up earlier around even when we provide interpretation and translation, we still don't necessarily, that alone will never solve the challenges we have with getting the engagement we need. And so the idea with this person being in a more centralized office that's focused on how we do outreach, we'll be able to support all the people, including us, doing this work. And we are looking at trying to do a more concrete language access plan for each of our projects, at least at the beginning, so we can be clear on here's what we're going to translate, here's when interpreters will be provided, here's how much we think it will cost, you know, being really clear up front. So those are some of the things we're working on, and would continue to love feedback. Like I said earlier, we are always open to ideas on how we do this better. Because we agree with you, we're not achieving the results we want to, and we've tried so many strategies, right? From prioritizing dollars to do the translation interpretation to, we know some people are just never going to come to us. So we're trying a community navigator model where we go, we identify people in the community that are trusted with those who often, a lot of it's, you know, mistrust of coming to a government meeting, barriers, not just language, but other types of barriers as well. So that's a model that we heard a lot from people could work. And so we've prioritized money for that for upcoming projects we have in 2021. So I just want to emphasize that we really are trying to solve this, not just in CPD, but citywide, and are would love to continue the conversation with you about better techniques we can use.
Great. I see that we have some hands up. I just want to note that, you know, just Courtland, I understand how it might seem like a waste if people aren't there, but now that we're virtual, if we can get to a place where we can record it, or we can have some sort of minutes that are translated, it can do a lot to trying to get it into the hands of people later. I've noticed in my own personal work that, you know, more than 90% of the people who consume the content do it after the fact, not live. And so really trying to figure that out, I think, is important. I appreciate what you're saying, Sarah. I actually would love to talk to you more about that and how we can use that to influence the governor, because we are trying to push in the governor to help with this, because again, this is not, Denver's even more farther ahead than say Rifle, Colorado, but they need it in Rifle, Colorado too. Eleni, I see that you're next, and then I don't know if it's Loretta or Steve. I know you're also both typing there. Then Miles and Cindy. So I'll type that in the chat who's going next.
Yeah, I just had a question, or a question and a comment about East Central. So I get that you guys have learned some lessons regarding the neighborhood planning process. I have been pointing these things out for almost a year about the lack of inclusion, the lack of language access, and was basically shut down by CPD. And there was no access, no inclusion, just a lot of verbiage around that. And yet the East Central and East area plans are moving forward. We had a pandemic. The only time any translated documents were distributed was a few days before the city shuttered under the public health order in March. So we finally got some bilingual flyers to go to people's homes, but 3 days later, the mayor said, don't, you know, we're under a public health order, stay at home. So a lot of that outreach never happened. So even though we worked and worked and worked and took it upon ourselves to act on behalf of the city, it didn't happen. So to continue to move the plan forward seems like a slap in the face to people of color, to people who don't speak English. You have now several civil rights complaints pending at a federal agency. And I'm glad that there's lessons learned, but $20,000 spent on translation is nothing given the number of plans and the number of community outreach that is going on, I'm sure daily at community planning and development. So I guess I'm confused as to why the plan continued to move forward when so much outreach that needed to be done wasn't done. And what will you do in the future to change that for other neighborhoods? Because I don't think it's right what happened in East Central and East area. And I think that federal funds were accepted, so it should have been the gold standard of outreach, inclusion, language justice, because you accepted the federal funds and said, we're going to make this the model, and it ended up not being that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that we, you know, we'll admit that it's not a public, or I'm sorry, a perfect process, and that we can always do better, and we are always trying to do better. And I guess in respect to some of the specific things that you had mentioned, we did think that we were doing a good and inclusive job of conducting outreach. I understand that others may disagree with that, but we were doing a job on outreach that was consistent with the federal outline in RTD, which is oversees the grant money that we use for that project. Didn't raise any concerns in response to the complaints. So
I
we
would
thought that it was
disagree on
resolved.
that, Courtland. I would disagree. I actually am going to move to a call right now this afternoon with RTD about this matter. So maybe you're not informed about it, but there are concerns. And so
Sure.
to continue to say that there's not at the RTD or at the federal level is potentially a misstatement.
Okay, yeah, there may be more newer information I'm not aware of, but with the back and forth that we already had with RTD, I was under the impression that it was resolved.
Just to get a couple of facts out there, I think it's important for folks to know. Again, we could probably spend a whole day talking. Like I said, always open to ideas of how do we do better and all the different ways you can provide language access. But I did want to be clear on the East and East Central plan. We have, I'm trying to count up now, at least hundreds of instances in which we paid for interpretation and translation throughout the entire process. So I know that some of the comments are focused on actually getting a draft of the entire plan in different languages. But what we found and heard from a lot of the stakeholders was the being able to talk to somebody in person, number one, is a huge thing. And so that's at our meetings, but also going and doing individual focus groups. And not just in Spanish, we have paid for live interpretation for Burmese, Farsi, Persian, French. The list goes on, in addition to Spanish, to a lot of stakeholders that were involved in the East and East Central plans. And
I
that
can
includes
tell you not in East
in-person.
Central. I can
That
tell you not in
includes-
East Central.
I'm sorry, I'm
you're
still
not gonna
talking.
get-
That includes flyers as well as some written materials that were also translated and doing surveys in different languages. So again, we can, like Courtland said, nobody's trying to say this was a perfect process. I think I acknowledged earlier, this is a barrier we all face. How do we continue to prioritize research and get more people engaged? It's not just about what you translate. It's about a lot of bigger issues. And we hear you, and we are working to try to do better with every process.
Sarah, just to follow up, you can't get, it's 2020. This is not 2000. We keep hearing about how the neighborhood plan has to look 20 years out. And you guys can't even figure out language justice, which to me, like, I have been presenting on this issue in my career for 20 years. There are agencies and cities that have implemented a language justice plan, not a couple of years ago, decades ago, and have been enhancing that. And you guys are struggling in 2020 with this. I'm just saying it's a little bit late to be doing that. And then ask the neighborhood, we're asking you guys to look 20 years forward. And I feel like I got to look 20 years backwards just to get us caught up to where we need to be in 2020. And that to not have the documents in Spanish or in any language is an affront to those communities. They feel already not included. You're saying, hey, I can talk to someone if I show up at a meeting, but I have to find out that there's a meeting first. So that needs to be in my target language. I need to figure out what the meeting's about. So I need to assess, should I attend? What do I do? What is it about? To assume that people will find out about it when there's nobody actually doing outreach in the targeted language is like putting the cart before the horse. They're not going to show up because they don't even know. So not having documents and a lot of documents accessible to people means that they're not going to be engaged, or they're going to think they heard something about it, but it might be word of mouth. It might not even be accurate. And so that's really the problem. And so, you know, not translating the documents is a huge issue. To me, it's a huge issue when nothing is provided in the target language and there's little or no engagement going on in those communities. at least in East Central. I can't speak as much to East area. I know a little bit about that, but when I showed up at meetings, they didn't have any documents translated either. So how are people going to retain the information, make comments in their native language when nothing is in that format for them to participate? So then they said some verbal comments to somebody and they wrote them down and then gave them to a city planner. I mean, I think that that's just not equitable and fair.
All right, Alini, thank you. Loretta, Steve, I'm not sure who's going to speak. Maybe it's Steve?
It's Steve. Hi, Steve Harley here. I want to turn to a different topic, which is a different aspect of the neighborhood planning topic. I sat on the Baker neighborhood plan and the Alameda Station area plan, and I felt that that process was effective partly because it was so intimate. And so my question is, in going to these wider planning initiatives, is the decision to do that simply practical in order to try to cover the whole city with a limited budget and a limited staff, or is there really some kind of functional advantage there? Because I'm hearing a lot of rancor about how these wider plans have been executed, and some of it has to do with the very different kinds of neighborhoods that are included in one area, and makes it a little bit harder to focus down on I would think on what's going on in very small areas. And also, I haven't been on one of these large area plans, but I just anticipate it being difficult to assemble representation from such a large area and get them all at the table effectively. So that's my question is what's driving this wider assemblage rather than the small plans that used to be done?
Yeah, so the driver is, you know, that map that I put up that showed the different shades of pink, that it's, you know, we thought inherently unfair, you know, that we only get to some of the neighborhoods and all the others have to do without a plan. And just, you know, having so many neighborhoods, 78 neighborhoods, and neighborhood planning processes taking, you know, a couple of years in and of themselves, that was a driver to moving towards the NPI model, was to try to cover the whole city. Now, at the same time, as we do that, we try to have it both ways. It's not that we just focus on the larger geographic area of, you know, 5 or 6 neighborhoods. We pull representatives for the steering committee from each of the neighborhoods that are within it. We hold targeted meetings, go to RNO meetings and whatnot for individual neighborhoods within the documents themselves. Each one of them has sections that are focused on the individual neighborhoods. So there's customized recommendations that apply to the individual neighborhoods within the larger planning area. So we try to have both our process as well as the document itself work at different scales, so that, you know, it isn't that you didn't get a neighborhood plan and all you got was this thing that looked at a much larger area. You got both. That's the intent.
Miles, you're next.
Well, just because Miles is
Sorry about that. Oh, I'm here.
Well, but
Quick question for Courtland. During the MPI process, or I'm sorry, the East Central Area Plan, CPD chose not to address the BRT or even look at traffic or transportation and how it would change due to that BRT process. And you just mentioned that they would, that is part of the planning process. So I'd just like some feedback on how CPD was just able to sidestep that and not really talk about it, because we were doing a small area plan and parking and traffic and density with protected bike lanes all overlap in that area. And they just chose to sidestep the whole thing. And then just another comment on the East Area Plan or East Central Area Plan is the implications and what actually happened to the neighborhood was quite impactful in the sense of it's the most divisive thing that has ever happened to our neighborhood. Because the plan was presented and there was very little explanation as to what was on the plan and how it was being interpreted, it divided our neighborhood. People were being bullied. People called police on other neighbors. And just in the big picture, because of the lack of information provided on what was being planned, it just created an uproar for our neighborhood. And again, I've been here 20 years, and this is the most divisive thing that has ever happened to our neighborhood. And I would also ask, from a larger planning standpoint, so the plan came through, you divided the neighborhood. Do you have anything to help us mend some of these divides now that we've created these different camps and as people also don't trust CPD, don't necessarily want to be engaged. So there's a couple of different things happening here at the same time. But do you have anything in your toolbox, or do you feel you have any role in helping the neighborhoods kind of heal from all of this?
Okay, so that's a lot. I guess I would disagree with your characterization that the neighborhood planning process is creating the divisions within the community. We're trying to build a common vision, right? That was the first slide that I put out there in my presentation. Was the purpose is to create a shared vision for the community, and one that most people can agree with. And as the planning process is moving forward, and we're going into adoption, we're hearing a lot, from folks who don't agree with the vision or the content of the plan, but also a lot of people who do. I think the idea that the plan is solely responsible for the divisions of the community is just not something that I would agree with.
Well, I agree that we will disagree, because a lot of that division came from neighbors who there was a bikeway proposed in front of the house, and they didn't know what that meant. They didn't know if they would lose parking, if they would widen the road. And the city basically took a couple months to even begin to address that. And then so you had people for biking, people against biking, people for parking, against parking. And it was the lack of clarity as to what that bike lane, a description of that bike lane being available from CPD. And that continued for a while because of this lack of information. And so I would solely put that on CPD, that because it was not clear what they were doing, it caused a lot of discord with neighbors, some for, some against, because no one understood what was happening.
Yeah, I guess it sounds like you're kind of presuming that we would have the answer up front to share with people as we're having a conversation. That's not always the case. The planning process is a back and forth. Ideas emerge. We work at those ideas. They can change over time. We don't always know exactly the details of a bike lane facility, for example, when we're discussing it. Sometimes those conversations can get messy, but I think what's important is, where does it land? Do you think that it's still in the state that it was, or are you sort of regretting the process that it took to get there?
All right, Cindy.
I'm not. Okay. Well, let me quickly follow up. I'm not sure if it's following up with the state. I guess I would go back to, you just mentioned you don't quite know what it's going to be. So the city said there's going to be a bikeway down this street. And the residents are like, well, wait a minute, am I losing parking? Are you widening the street? Is it, what's the impact? And as you said, the issue was, well, we don't quite know what it's going to be. We're just putting it down this street. And we actually won't necessarily tell you why we're putting it here. It's just here because we've heard comments. And so there was a lack of input, as well as the neighbors wanting to know what is being planned, and the lack of, from your position, oh, well, you know, it's going to be here somewhere. We're going to do something. And that was the problem. And they've cleared it up. You have better tools, but I think they need to be improved. And you need to clarify with your language what you're proposing. So that would be my comment back.
Cindy, are you there? It's your turn next.
I'm here. I'm ready. Two things. First thing is, when we were going through the East Central process, there were conflicting points or conflicting plans with other agencies in Denver. For example, the bicycle plan that is being planned at this moment. My neighbor who is on the council or the task force, he didn't even know that East Central was doing something completely different than their project was doing. So again, I would advise that CPD get with all the other things going on, because it's even hard for us to know what all is going on and coordinate. The second thing is, does the MPI process have the capability to do mass rezoning? And then it would go through with the adopted plan versus going through the rezoning plan, or, you know, a rezoning process. And what I'm referring to is in East Central, the downtown zoning that was shown on the maps in the northwest sector was not true to what it is now. I know a developer has proposed this, but that wasn't what the existing plan showed. And the other thing in the future is that a way to do ADU rezoning? How does CPD view this?
Okay, so our practice in Denver has long been to do the plan. It's a policy document. It informs future regulatory decisions like rezonings, but that we haven't typically paired them together. There are some other communities that do that. I used to work in one that did, where you bring forward the plan and a rezoning for the neighborhood together as a pair. A drawback of that is that everyone focuses on the zoning as opposed to everything that's in the plan. But it's something that's possible, but it's not a common practice in Denver. We keep them separate, and you could follow up with an area-wide rezoning, you know, through a council member sponsored effort after the plan, but it's not something that we've paired together with plan adoption.
Great, so I can assume that was a mistake and that rezoning will not happen. I made comments and it wasn't changed. In other areas in the city, or in that East Central area, the zoning was changed, but I never saw it changed in that area. So I'm assuming it will not go through.
Are you talking about zoning or the place?
Rezoning of the northwest section from, I can't remember what it was before, but now it showed a mass area of downtown zoning, which was not in place there before. It was a spot, it was spot zoning for downtown, and now it shows mass area where downtown came up onto the hill to Grant Street.
Okay. Well, I'll just, you
Check
know,
it out.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that adopting the plan doesn't change anybody's zoning. That those things are separate in Denver.
So those maps do need to be changed on East Central to reflect that then. Thank you.
Okay.
We're reaching our time here, and I do have one last question. I think maybe Christine does too, based on the look on her face. Can you tell me, has the RFP process changed at all in what you're asking from consultants who assist you in this work from the first till now?
How has it changed our approach to consultants?
Has it changed based on the concerns and the feedback that you've gotten of what you're asking of consultants?
Yeah, I would say that it is going to change, like for future rounds. One, I think, it's clear that we need to devote more resources to outreach and engagement, because that does tend to be a limiting factor in what we're able to do. So not that the budget's getting bigger, it's actually probably getting smaller, but that we would need to devote more of it to that. And then another area where we're, for future rounds that we're looking to change is to do more, technical studies, to use consultants more for that, so that we have like very detailed studies on which to base the recommendations, rather than simply, helping us with the planning process and each of its steps. So, we should have in future rounds, more market studies or those types of information to accompany plans that we can use for making recommendations based on.
Christine, you're up.
Mr. Chair, if I might make an observation about the city's people working on this project. Listening as I have to the last whole bunch of these meetings, it would be easy for the city's personnel to take away the idea that we think that their outreach work has been horrible. I just don't think that's reasonable. I have a lot of experience doing this at the neighborhood level, and I applaud the amount of work, the amount of effort, and the amount of thought, and the success of the outreach work that's been done by these people who we hire to do the work that I argue we probably should do. And I think they've done a wonderful job, not perfect, but excellent. And I certainly don't want them to take away the idea that INC thinks they're failing in this. I don't believe that's true. And I, for one, greatly thank them for the work that we've done and the product that they've got.
Well, Adrian, I hear what you're saying, and I do agree that we need to support our workers in what we're doing. But I can tell you that the Latinos in my community have been consternated by this. And excellent perhaps may not be the best, maybe average. It could be a better solution and making towards progress. But I do want to say that I am grateful. I am grateful that they're joining us here on Saturday as well, to take the time to talk to our community. But I would just push back on you that excellent, a level of excellence that we would get an award nationally, I'm not sure of that, Adrian. Christina, your turn.
No, I didn't want to add anything. I was just going to say maybe ZAP could get together and accumulate suggestions for improving it instead of each one of us reaching out to Sarah and David and Courtland. Sort of like we did in the beginning in March with GLAC, where we had everybody come and we collected suggestions. Ian, what do you think of that?
Totally open to having that conversation. I think it would be something that would go beyond perhaps zoning and planning. Maybe we would want to talk to neighborhood presidents too.
Okay, so let's talk about that for maybe, okay. I don't know about around the city. It's 11:40. If somebody has something burning from their neighborhood that they can do in 1 minute, I guess we can, but we need to wrap up.
I just want to take a moment to talk about the housing and zoning incentive meeting that we briefed you all on last time. We participated in it this last month. Really problematic that as this conversation was going on, we were broken up into breakout groups that isolated us based on community and developers. And early on, Amanda Sandoval and I were asking, why in the world would we not come together to have these conversations? Ultimately, we were broken up into these conversations. I was under the impression that they were going to be recorded and that they would be provided to us at the end of our dialogue with the community feedback. I requested the video and I was told on camera we would not be getting it. So I requested through Amanda Sandoval and Robin Kinich and said, do we really need a Cora for this? That this should be open to the public. And so we do have the video. We are going to be sharing it with all of the RNOs so that people can see both what the community dialogue was and the developer dialogue. But I do want to be clear, just some highlights. it became clear to me, verbatim almost, that many developers said the only way in which we would get the kind of affordability we wanted would be through an IHO, through an inclusionary housing ordinance, that these deals just aren't not good enough for them. And honestly, it's more hassle. I was even more disappointed that I heard that perhaps there may be property management companies that do not want to deal with low-income people as a burden. And I believe that that is a violation of civil rights in our first place, and against the new city rules that you cannot discriminate based on people's revenue and how they're paying rent. So I do just want to update that. I have talked to several of the members. Sherry, I know that typically you participate in this, that you had, oh gosh, why am I spacing her name right now?
Sarah McCarthy.
Sarah McCarthy. Yeah. I talked with Sarah McCarthy and Nola Miguel from GES. There's a supreme consternation at the fact that we were split apart from each other, and that perhaps they're not listening to us. In all reality, there's like 20 people on this task force group, and only 5 of us are community members. And so it's a lot of burden on us. I'm trying to do my due diligence to share that information with you. There is more work to do, but I want you to have the video so that you can watch yourself. And that's really.
And I'm very concerned. I share your concerns. And to everyone here, Ian's exactly right. The community representation on that committee is very small. And I think it's going to result in something akin to what we're seeing with other committees, group living. I'm very concerned that it's too small and that how the information that's being developed there is going to be disseminated against other neighborhood groups. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned, and Ian, Sarah briefed me about your call, so thank you very much, and about the meeting. I'm concerned about the way that was handled, and we intend to reach out to Joel and Clark about that.
So yeah, that's my, again, if anyone does have time, if anyone wants to stay on the call, I'm willing to stay here to hold the call open for you to share your information, because we will be posting this video. So we'll be reaching more of our membership if you choose to share what's happening in your community now.
Can we thank Sarah and Courtland? So if they'd like to.
Oh yeah, I thought we had done that. Oh, absolutely.
They're still on.
If you want to stay here to hear part of the conversation, of course you're welcome. It's a public meeting. If not, thank you for putting together these, and thank you for continuing to improve, because you know, I am hearing that it is getting somewhat better and that the feedback is getting there. And so we remain committed to working with you on that.
And Courtland, I have a request for the link to your PowerPoint. Did you post it in the chat?
It's, I could make it a PDF and email it. I guess it's not posted anywhere.
Is it online somewhere?
No, I just made it for this meeting. So if I could email it to you.
That'd be great, and then we can send it out. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, goodbye, everybody, unless you want to stay around and do a very brief round the city from your neighborhood. And we have maybe 15 minutes max. Okay. See any hands up?
I don't. I think we should try to fit in around the city next time. So that
yeah, why don't we?
It was a really good. So many topics.
Well, I thought this one was fabulous, and if I could share a screen, I have spent quite a bit of time working. Hold on a second, on the equity concepts in Blueprint. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask questions to Sarah, but you know, I try not to hog the meeting about especially the middle one, because it seems like it's still being talked about, but not really formulated. What steps have been taken according to Blueprint to reduce vulnerability to displacement? So I think maybe we invite Sarah back again to answer some more questions about Blueprint's goals.
Oh, totally open to that, Christine.
Good. So if anybody else has any other ideas for meetings in the next couple of months, will you email zoningplanning@denverinc.org? It'd be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so Christine, if you want to, oh, Gertie, you want to say something? Was that Gertie?
No, that was Jean.
Oh, hi, Jean.
Hi. I just was wondering, I mean, do you think it's helpful to have community folks? I know that we can't speak really, but do you think it is helpful to have more community people showing up at some of these meetings, particularly that zoning incentive meeting, just to show that, you know, this really is on people's priority radar?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. We should always be trying to get people. And I would say that the effort by the small but mighty group of this last group got a lot of people on the last call.
Yeah, we
More
sent
than
it out too.
before, yeah.
Right.
We
Yeah.
sent the link.
I
do. I really think it's important to have people watching, because as it's in real time, then you just go, whoa, what just happened here? So it's a great idea. And we do send the links, but here's the problem. The Inc. ZAP list only goes to people who have opted in. And so we're counting on you forwarding it, or because INC doesn't even send it out to its general delegates. It's just a very narrow list. We really need some more. I think we need some more work on our lists. So I did have one other point. Where is it? Oh, I'm just curious, but we recently had Amanda Sawyer come to our R&O, and we did a Zoom meeting, and it was very well attended, but we specifically asked her not to bring a PowerPoint because they tend to just go on. And I wonder if people think it's useful to have that, or you would like to just have conversations with Sarah Showalter. So anybody have any input on that? PowerPoints versus conversations.
Steve here. I think it depends on the subject. Sometimes you really need some graphics and other times maybe not. So
thank you. That's great. I mean, maybe I just find myself tuning out after about 10 minutes of a PowerPoint.
I think also that if, you know, they can get on Teams, because that's what they seem to have to really do most of the time, is so that everybody is, especially in a conversation, so you can see everybody's faces on the screen. I mean, I think that that's really, you know, critical, because you're hearing somebody that is, you know, off on another page, and you don't even necessarily know who that is. You know, trying to encourage people to show up, you know, face-wise, just to have a little more connection rather than a name, is always helpful, although I understand why people don't always do that either.
Okay, well, seeing no more comments on that line. Bye, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Gertie was saying something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My suggestion is that when people sign in, they either give their home address or they give the neighborhood in which they live, not necessarily their statistical neighborhood, but the RNO in which they are involved. And if they're not involved with an RNO, that's fine. But I just think it's good, at least for me, to know what part of the city people live in, because I think that really impacts the input that they're giving and also how I evaluate it.
Thank you. Okay, see you all in a month. Oh, wait.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Ian.